Thank you. Yes, this is far from an abstract topic really for me. And so much of the talk's ideas have come out of my own experience as well. And in preparing this, part of how I work is I try to fill my schedule as I was writing this talk with more things than I could handle in order to try to see how I could put this into practice. So that's very much how I work, so I hope this will come out not just as abstract comments, but as someone who's been working through some of these things and trying to deal with them. Let's start with John Milton. John Milton wrote this: "The mind is its own place and can make a heaven out of hell and a hell out of heaven." This quote actually quite encourages me because it shows me that he knows us well, doesn't he? He can understand how much we can get ourselves in trouble just by what's going on in our heads. And at the same time, it encourages me because he wrote this over 200 years ago in Paradise Lost. And so anxiety is an old problem that's gone back many centuries. And so perhaps there is some wisdom to be gleaned from the past as well. That is certainly what I hope. I would like to start with a few statistics, and I'm going to make this part interactive, so I'm going to get you to put your hand up to vote to see what you think as we look at some statistics on anxiety. So here's the first question. Who suffers more from anxiety disorders, men or women or their equal? Who thinks men suffer more from anxiety disorders? Okay, thank you. Who thinks women? All right, the majority going for women. Who thinks the same? Okay, about 30 the same. Well, you are right if you went for women. They are the ones who tend to struggle more. If you look at the profile of who struggles the most, women are 3 times as likely to have an anxiety disorder with respect to men. And other groups at risk are young people, particularly students, not married, unemployed people, and those who live in the city. So if you're a student working in a city, studying at a city, then you probably fit into one of the highest risk categories. Something like 20% of students have clinically high levels of anxiety that they study with. Second question, some people have serious problems with anxiety and anxiety disorder. Of those that do, how many of those seek professional help? So I want you to put your hand up for what percentage you think fits them. So how many people think more than 90% of people seek professional help? Okay, more than 80? More than 70? Okay, keep your hands raised. More than 60? So, okay, more than 50? So almost 50 is, okay, more than 40? Yeah, okay, so most of you are saying by 40 they're there. Okay, the answer is actually 26%, according to one survey. So given that 40% of adults at one point or another in their lives will struggle with clinically significant levels of anxiety, this is surprisingly low. Third question, simple true or false to finish with. Anxiety disorders are one of the easiest mental health problems to solve. Who thinks true? Okay, hardly anyone, fair enough. Who thinks false? Yeah, you're almost all there. And you'll be surprised, the answer is true. And it's with that encouraging point that actually I wanted to talk on this issue, because there is a lot of hope. Harry Barry is an Irish medical doctor who specialises in anxiety and depression and mental health disorders. And he does a lot with people who struggle with panic attacks. And he said there's one phrase that I repeat constantly to people who are having panic attacks and struggling with anxiety. And he said it really helps them. It makes a big difference in just helping them in that difficult moment. And what is that phrase? To repeat to themselves this: symptoms of anxiety are uncomfortable, but they're not dangerous. What I like about this phrase is it helps calm you down in the midst of a difficult turn. It helps deal with the anxiety in that moment. I'm not sure I would endorse it completely. I'd want people to go and seek medical help if they're having turns that they're concerned of. I wouldn't want them just to focus on this phrase. But it encourages me that he's found something that's worked with many people who are struggling with anxiety. You know, it's curious as we begin to look at this topic of anxiety. Not all anxiety is bad. A little anxiety is actually good for you. It's like a little bit of rain. A little bit of rain causes the grass to grow. The problem is when you have lots of rain, and so it is with anxiety. It stimulates adrenaline in us and it prepares us for action. When you walk and you're about to cross the road and a car comes by, perhaps there's a little bit of anxiety as you are aware you need to be careful. That's a good thing. The issue is when you don't, you continue being anxious constantly and then it floods you. That's when it's a problem. So, how are we going to tackle the problem today? Well, I'd like to split the talk into two parts. Firstly, how to understand your anxiety. Secondly, how to face it. So firstly, how to understand your anxiety. The first thing to say here, if you're anxious and you don't know why you're anxious, don't worry. The majority of people who struggle with anxiety fail to be able to put their finger on what causes anxiety. The difference between anxiety and worry is anxiety is against an unknown threat, whereas worry is against something specific. So conversely, if you're here and you feel worried about something and you know what that issue is, I'd like to say you've actually made huge progress. That is actually a big step forward in dealing with anxiety. If you can't identify the issue, as most people can't, it's like boxing blindfolded. You don't know where the enemy is, your eyes are closed, and so it's hard to fight and protect yourself. Whereas if you're worried and you know what the issue is, then your eyes are open, you just don't know how to attack the enemy. So that's the first thing to say on it. I'm going to break down my first points into two issues. Firstly, how do you know you're anxious? Secondly, what causes it? How do you know you're anxious? Well, a lot of people will look at some symptoms they've had. You can break down all sorts of anxiety disorders into phobias, obsessive-compulsive disorders, washing your hands constantly. You can panic attacks, I've already mentioned, as well as other general issues. And often we focus on those big things. And what I'd really like to do in this first part of the talk is I'd like you to break down your anxiety. I'd like you to see the various levels it happens in and understand instead perhaps the curve. To understand what happens. Because we focus on when we explode. Everyone explodes in some way or other. There are those who explode externally. They might reach their peak and then they're like a bull who just sees red and they explode and they let everyone have it who's anywhere near them. Some people explode externally, others explode internally. That's what I tend to do. I would tend to get ill and I won't get better as I should. For other people, that could be a panic attack. It could be obsessive-compulsive disorder. It's something that's turned in when you've really got to your peak of anxiety. But I want you to begin to think about the steps that can be before that. And I'm just going to use my personal example here, not because there's anything particularly important about that or useful, but I want to use it to try and help you then think through what your example might be. So before I get there, there's often a stage before. I call it brain fog, where I'm just unable to think clearly and decision-making's hard and I can't make sense of things. I often notice physical symptoms, backache, tiredness. It's really weighing on me, this issue. But there's signs before that as well. Often the first of my physical signs is I get a cold that just doesn't go away. You know, one of those that just lasts and lasts and lasts. And I begin to see that my body's reacting to the anxiety. Some people find it easy to understand how our bodies react to our emotional state. For those for whom this is more of a new idea, I like to use the example of imagine you're sitting down, you want to finish something. And so you're working on it hard and you're working perhaps for a couple of hours trying to get something done. It could be filling out an annoying form, it could be writing an essay or doing some work. And imagine you don't take a break and you begin to get a bit of a headache. Now imagine you continue focusing on that, just pushing on, and you go another hour. Well, what's going to happen to your headache? It's just going to get more and more intense. And if you keep on pushing on, it will just get worse till at some point your head might drop. That's some of the things we're looking at in this curve, how our body can begin to react to the anxiety we're feeling. But there's steps before. For me, before I get more of the physical signs, I begin to get restless. I don't want to stop. I have a tense stomach. My sleep can be affected at this point. Before that, I notice the thoughts in my head just begin to pick up pace. They're racing around more and quickly. I can be impatient, finishing other people's sentences for them. And I realise I'm anxious. But that's not actually my first tell. That's often where I pick it up. But actually I've got even an earlier step. And for me, that's often just a little cough. Those of you who know me may be able to recognise that. So why am I sharing this with you at the start? Because I don't want you to start fighting your anxiety when you get to step 5 or step 6. I want you to begin to trace it back earlier to steps 1, 2 and 3 so that you can begin to fight it and recognise it in yourself earlier. So what I would like to do at this point is just have a brief pause, and I'd like you to take 1 or 2 minutes just to talk to the person sitting next to you about what that curve might look like for you. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, or you don't know the person sitting next to you and you feel uncomfortable just talking about that, talk about what that might look like for somebody you know in your life. You don't have to say who it is. I don't want you to focus just on how it works in me. I want you to think through, how does anxiety work in somebody else, so that you get used to beginning to trace through those steps. And then I hope it might help you start thinking about your own life. So just 1 or 2 minutes, the person sitting next to you, go for it. Okay, let me pull you back together. If you find that exercise hard, it can often be fruitful talking with a partner, if you've got someone close to you or someone else in your family who might know you, or just good friends. Often we find it so hard to see ourselves and so easy to see other people. But it can be a really useful thing to trace that through. So that you're not just fighting at stage 6 or 5, but you can begin to deal with the first signs of anxiety when it comes in. That makes the battle so much easier. Okay, so the second part under the first heading I wanted to look at was to note at what causes you anxiety. I was at a conference a while ago, and I was sitting down, and this girl, I was sitting with a friend. I didn't know many people at this conference. This girl had just arrived, and so I started talking with her. She'd had a difficult train journey, been tiring, the train's been late, so she's quite tired. And I just started talking with her. And we're both emotional people. So as we started chatting, we soon started getting onto our emotions and just talking from the heart about how things were going. At this point, my friend sitting next to me couldn't control himself any longer. He was like, "Paul, stop it! Stop being so heavy on her. She's only just arrived. Let her relax." And for him, that was a really tiring conversation. Talk about emotions. Oh. But for us, it was the most relaxing thing in the world. Whereas, you see, if we had probably talked about politics, he might have been very happy and we might have been like, oh. Different topics affect us in different ways. And so actually, if you begin to notice the things that stress you, you'll actually find they can often be quite different to other people. And then it can be fun to trace why that is. For example, I have a great tolerance to talking about people's problems, not behind their back, but if someone has a problem and they want to talk to me about it, I'm quite happy with that because I enjoy talking from the heart. As I begin to dig there, so why is that? What's going on there? Why doesn't that stress me? Whereas filling in a form would. And as I begin to dig, it's because actually I really like connecting with people. I yearn for deeper relationships. That's a deep need in me. Whereas if you tell me I've got to read the terms and conditions of a product, like I'm tearing my hair out. I'm like, no, it's so hard. So notice some of these things. What is it that causes your anxiety? And it will actually help you. Or what are the things that cause you stress? It will really help you get to the root of some things. Okay. That is the first point I wanted to look at. On to the second part, and this is probably what you expected me to spend all my time on, and I will spend the majority of my time here, how to face it. And I'm going to look at this in two ways, really. Firstly, physically, a few brief comments on physical habits, which are good, and then secondly, mentally. Firstly, physically, exercise. You could put this in on just about every talk on psychology you do, because it just helps for everything. But what I want to underline is really the effect this has in countering anxiety. When you're anxious, it's as if your body thinks, or you think there's a lion there, which is about to attack you. If you think there is a lion there about to attack you, you will put on hold everything, because there's a lion there about to attack you. If you continue to do exercise as you normally do, you're actually undermining your body's interpretation of the danger. It's saying, it's okay, I can still continue doing my normal life. That counteracts all the adrenaline that's running through. And you're suggesting to your body, you're misinterpreting the situation. It's not that serious. And that point applies to diet as well, and having regular meals. It just undermines the issue that there might be a desperate threat that's going to get you. You're saying, no, actually, we can keep this. I put less coffee. Coffee stimulates adrenaline. So actually, when you're anxious, that's a good thing to go easy on. Almost every student I know disobeys that because they get anxious when exams come and all the coffees are going in. But that actually makes it harder to fight against. Thirdly, I put have fun, but more keep the hobbies going. Keep protecting the space that says there's not a lion there about to jump on you. I was chatting with a friend of mine who's a student, and she was telling me, I said, I think, you should try taking a day off every now and again. Oh, I can't afford to take a day off. So what about a couple of sessions of the day, like afternoon and evening? Oh, I couldn't do that at all. I've just got so much to do. I said, okay, well, you sure about that? She's like, yeah, because yesterday, for example, I didn't do any work because I just couldn't, my brain was so full and I was so stressed. I was like, that's the point. If you can actually set a day aside, not waste a day because you were so tired from all the adrenaline overload, but if you can set aside some time to rest and maintain the hobbies, again, you're undermining things. It's fascinating, the interaction between these four areas: our body, our mind, our behaviour, and our emotions. There would be arrows in all directions there. They drive each other and are driven by each other. And that's why some of these physical tips can just be helpful, because you undermine your mind's interpretation of the anxious situation you're in. These slides will be online, so if you're worried about taking notes, or if you want them, you can come and see me afterwards, and I'll make sure you can take some good notes while you're here. Okay, lastly, sleep well. That's very easy for me to say it. It's quite hard to do it in practice when you're anxious, but there are lots of good tips online. I'm not going to go through them. I just want to note that for the same reasons, that is a good point. Okay, second part of how to face anxiety, and this is what I'm going to spend most of the time on. Work on your thoughts. Here is the bigger battle, I would say. And I want to break this down really by looking at three approaches. Firstly, we're going to look at the classic approach to dealing with anxiety in psychology. This is called cognitive behavioural therapy. So we're going to go through that. That is the approach that's scientifically proven to work, and so that's a good place to start. You might say, why on earth look at any other approaches? Because generally, people find it effective to a point. And so at some point, if you struggle with anxiety, you often begin to look, what are the alternative approaches? So I've picked out one of the popular common approaches called the Linden Method. We'll look at that. And then I want to look at a spiritual approach where we'll take a historic text. Spirituality has been proven to work in fighting anxiety. So I want to have a look at that and compare. How does that compare to the other approaches that we're going to look at? So firstly, let's look at cognitive behavioural therapy. And I'm going to give you some practical examples. I picked an exam when people are facing exams, but this could apply just as easily to health diagnoses or anything else. It's just helping you understand how it works. So it works on dealing with the thoughts, and it notices the negative thoughts you have and how they distort reality, and it tries to correct them. For example, what if I fail an exam? What if my health diagnosis is terrible from the latest test I do? Well, there you're distorting your thoughts, you're predicting the worst. And a more realistic thought would be, well, I haven't failed an exam before, so it's improbable I'm going to fail these. Or I don't know the results of the test, so I just need to be more realistic at the moment. Or negative thought too. If I fail an exam, it would be a disaster. There you're distorting reality because you're exaggerating the situation. If I fail an exam, I'll have to do a resit. If my test diagnosis comes back badly, well, I'll have to do further treatment. It works on trying to make your thoughts a little bit more realistic and balanced. Or a final one I threw in, because it's related. If I have a panic attack, I will surely fail all my exams. Here you're jumping to false conclusions. It would be uncomfortable, but it's not likely to make you fail all your exams. Cognitive behavioural therapy works on a number of ways that we distort reality. Just to pick one of these that you may be able to identify with, filtering comments to hear only the negative ones. Just as I was preparing this talk, I was at another conference. I don't just go to conferences to get helpful illustrations for my talk, but it seems to be happening today. And I was at this conference, and I'd given a talk. It was a weekend conference, Saturday night and Sunday morning. And at Sunday lunch, I was sitting down, and one of the participants there, just having lunch with him, and he said to me, "Paul, what you shared on Saturday night was really powerful." Now in my head, this is how I translated that. Yeah, what I shared on Sunday morning wasn't very good, was it? It's interesting, isn't it, how we twist things. And so I started working, and I was just been looking at the CBT, and I was like, no, hang on, Paul, what did he actually say? Now, that could have been better than the Sunday morning for him. It could have been that my Saturday night message was better than my Sunday morning message. But the point is he chose to speak to me about the Saturday night thing because there was something there that touched him. Cognitive behavioural therapy works a lot on analysing this and trying to correct the distortions that we make in our heads. Secondly, let's look at the Linden Method, the alternative approach. And I'll just walk you through these steps. First of all, they say stop visiting every practitioner you can find to deal with anxiety. What I like about that is it says, well, time to start facing the battle. That's a good thing. But then the second point, you can begin to see why this is alternative. Talk to your doctor about withdrawing medication. That's not something I would recommend to anyone who's not being followed by a professional. Some psychologists do actually suggest you do that during a course of their treatment, but I would rather people worked on their anxiety while keeping the medication so that they're still stable. I don't think there's necessarily a need to do that. Step 3, stop researching anxiety. Again, trying to get you to do something. And 4, only follow this method. It's rather exclusive. If you look up this method online, on Amazon, this book, 51% of people vote it 5 stars out of 5. Brilliant for 51% of the people. 33% of the people vote it 1 star out of 5, the lowest. So it either people love it or they hate it, and there's not much ground in the middle. And I hope you'll begin to see why as we go through it. Step 5, stop talking about your condition. That's good. Stop focusing on self-pity and start thinking about how you're going to face it. Steps 6, 7 and 9, stop leaning on other people. Don't hold on to memories. Stop accommodating your anxiety. It's trying to get you ready to really face it. And the heart of this treatment, the key is step 8. Divert your mind. Make it your new habit always. And this is interesting because actually it's incredibly similar to CBT, isn't it? Working on your thoughts, here they say divert them. CBT says correct them. When I was researching this, I looked at another practitioner who wasn't either a cognitive behavioural expert or Linden Method. And she was going up to people saying, think of an example when you're really happy. I don't know, it might be going to the cinema with friends, having a day with your extended family. And when you get anxious, replace the thought with that. But it's curious, all of these approaches are working on interrupting your thoughts and changing them in some way. Very interesting. So what does our third method have to say to us? Well, the third method is the spiritual approach, and I'm going to take a passage from the Bible and use it to see how it compares to CBT and the Linden Method. And we'll talk about other aspects that spiritual approaches bring in as well. So this is from the Bible in a book called Philippians. It says this: "Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honourable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about such things," or these things. "What you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you." Well, let's look at how this compares. Firstly, notice in verse 8, it's working on your thoughts, very similar to CBT and Linden. You could say it's not as developed as the CBT approach of talking how you correct it, but it's still working on changing your thoughts, isn't it? Perhaps this is just the 2,000-year-old version. Secondly, it talks about practicing certain things. Now, I want to underline this because this is the importance of doing things despite how you feel. This is very much like the physical signs we were talking about, continuing to do exercise, continuing to eat regular meals. If you do that, you're undermining the practice of anxiety in you and the adrenaline that's being pumped. You can understand why, therefore, it emphasises so much about peace in this passage. Because if you continue to do these things, peace will follow. Thirdly, it talks about thanksgiving. The idea of thanking God is very useful. There's been a flurry of literature on this in the last 10 years in the academic circles. It's quite hard to, I guess, thank God if you don't believe in him. But there's been a lot showing its effectiveness. So one study's even looked at how being thankful helps the most. They did a study, I think it's Emmons and McCullough, yeah? And they compared two ways. One, trying to write a letter to someone who's done a lot for you in your past, expressing thankfulness. And another, just listing 3 things you're thankful for each day. They found the more effective approach was to list a list of 3 things you're thankful for. Fascinating. A lot of research that's been proving the effectiveness of thanksgiving recently. And then fourth, it talks about prayer and supplication. It seems to interrupt our thoughts, really very similar to CBT and the Linden Method. And so this really got me thinking. Just as prayer has been shown scientifically in journals to have a positive effect on anxiety, so has mindfulness, which is kind of the secular version of meditation, and all of these things have been shown to have an effect. Are they just effective because they're spiritual versions of the psychological approach? Is religion just an old form of cognitive behavioural therapy? Well, fortunately, somebody else asked that question just under a year ago. Bartkowski et al. Looked at this question and said, is it just enough to basically do spiritual practices but not be religious? Well, most people want to be, I think we all want to be spiritual but not religious. We want to have the benefits, just do the prayer, the meditation, the mindfulness, but not have to go to church and be involved in a religion. Is that as effective? His answer? No. So then, what is religion bringing to the table? Why is it a more effective form of dealing with anxiety than just being spiritual? Well, 2 points I want to underline. Actually, I'll hold that back for now. One, there's a community in America, a place called Roseto, you need to know about. This is a community where a small Italian community that had moved over to the States a number of years ago. And they drank like beasts. They smoked terribly. They ate diets of butter and cream and cheese and lots of things that everyone would say you should never eat. And they had the highest life expectancy in the area. And so all the health professionals going, what? How? How on earth are they living so long when they've got poor lifestyles, they're eating badly, they're drinking a lot? What is it that's being so effective? They found it was the power of community. They were all together, living together, caring for one another and holding one another up. And actually that was having a massive effect. When they compared other communities or other small groups that didn't have the same community, they didn't have the life expectancy. When this group, a generation passed, and they got more money and they started moving out of each other's houses and separating themselves, their life expectancy went down. Well, some people are very excited by this result because they go, well, look, I don't need to be religious. I can just be spiritual and join a good club. And that's true. That might work. But there's a second point. Clear meaning to life undermines anxiety. You see, so far we haven't actually dealt with some of the main causes of anxiety. And so I had a look online and I found myself another paper which gave what our main anxieties are today. And here they are. Here's some of the top 4. Fear of the unknown, fear of negative comments, fear of pain, and fear of death. Well, wouldn't it be great if somehow we could undermine these main anxieties? If we could cut them off at the start, they wouldn't cause us such a battle with anxiety. Wouldn't it be great if somehow we weren't afraid of the unknown because we knew for some reason that things would be okay? Wouldn't it be great if we weren't so affected by negative comments because we didn't depend on other people to give us our identity? Wouldn't it be great if pain and death didn't hurt us so much, or as if we had a solution to death? Well, those are big things to ask to undermine. They're big spiritual questions. So perhaps we should turn to one of the biggest spiritual gurus and ask what he would say to these things. Muslims would have him as a prophet, Jews as a good teacher, Hindus as a god, and 1/3 of the world's population would hold he is God. Jesus lived these. If you want to see him living the fear of the unknown, go and look at him in the Garden of Gethsemane and how he prays and the sweat that's like blood in his face. If you want to see the negative comments, just look at how they mocked him. And the emotional pain, just think about one of his 12 closest followers was one who'd betrayed him. The other 11, they all ran away. He knew pain. And then, of course, he died. And was that just all well and good for him, or does that have an impact on us now facing anxiety, or for his followers? Well, actually, I think it does have an effect on his followers, because he said they don't need to fear the unknown so much, because actually there is a God who's in control, and so they can trust themselves to him. The fear of negative comments and pain, emotional pain, he said, look, don't worry about that. Your identity is not defined by what other people say of you, but by the fact that God accepts you. It's talking about physical pain and death. Well, if Christianity doesn't solve death, I mean, that's kind of the main thing that Jesus actually did. He broke through it. That's his main claim. And he did it so that his followers would break through it too. Can you understand why it was that Jesus therefore said words like, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, and you'll find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden light." This goes way beyond CBT and the Linden Method. He's going right to the root of it, and he's undercutting it. And if you want to deal with your anxiety, you need to work out how to undermine these fears, and I don't know anyone who can do that like Jesus. How do you deal with your anxiety? Firstly, you need to understand it. Secondly, you need to face it, and you need to face it physically, mentally, and spiritually. Thank you for your time.